So we're looking at Unit 5 of the Level 4 Certificate in Education and Training. Unit 5 is planning to meet the needs of learners in education and training, and there's 4 learning outcomes on here. And it's all about, we've covered this in Unit 4 quite a bit. It's about your initial and diagnostic assessment, so it's quite based on that for learning outcome 1. So learning outcome 1 is to be able to use initial and diagnostic assessment to agree individual learning goals with learners. Learning outcome 2 will be able to plan inclusive teaching and learning in accordance with internal and external requirements. So you need to do a scheme of work, which I'll give you a template for, and I'm pretty sure you're doing a lesson plan in here as well.
Okay.
Learning outcome 3 is to be able to implement the minimum core in planning inclusive teaching and learning, which we come across so many times already, but it obviously just changes slightly. And then learning outcome 4, be able to evaluate your own practice when planning inclusive teaching and learning. So they've got a nice pattern that they go through for all of these units. So we're going to do analyze the role and use of initial and diagnostic assessment in agreeing individual learning goals. 1.2, use methods of initial and diagnostic assessment to negotiate and agree individual learning goals with learners. And then 1.3 is record learners' individual learning goals, not close. Oh dear. Let's start. So again, just as a quick recap, initial assessments are there to help you find out what your learners actually know, what they are, identify any aspects which might go unnoticed, have a conversation with them, find out about what their, backgrounds are, what they've actually learned. So it's just about you getting to know the learner themselves. It might be that they've got quite a disruptive background where they can't access, where they've got issues, family issues, and that they might be bringing in work late, or they might have to work in the setting. It might be that they don't have internet access and they may need to access the library or be given a bit of leeway. So just think personally about them. Initial assessments are good for that.
Okay.
Diagnostic assessments are good just to know what your learner skills are, what their knowledge is, what their strengths are, and if there's any areas that they can develop. So it's more on their skills and learning on this section. So 1.1, analyze the role and use of initial and diagnostic assessment in agreeing individual learning goals. So when we're looking at initial and diagnostic assessments, how do we use it and what is the role of this? So the role of both of these initial and diagnostic assessments are just there for you to establish a starting point so that you know where your learner is actually starting from, what their base is. This will help the learner and also the teacher to agree on SMART goals, so you can agree on and create different individual learning plans for them, things that are actually realistic and specific for each learner. So having a group of 10 learners and you all deciding, oh, we're all going to work on the same SMART goals, that's not going to work because it might not be applicable to everyone. So this helps you to do it individualized and make it unique for each person. Initial assessments, again, they'll just help you. You probably know all this as well from our previous unit. They help you to identify your learners' prior knowledge, what their skills are, and also to assess the suitability of what program they're on. So can they come in and do this? If they were coming on to do one of my healthcare courses, can they come on and are they suitable to learn the healthcare program? Are they on the correct level of study? If they're coming in and they're going to be doing the level, they need to do assignments which require a high level of understanding of English. Have they got that capability to be able to carry out and write assignments? If not, then you'd put them on a lower level of study, say level 1 or a level 2, and work them up from there. So It helps you to get information for what sort of delivery you're going to be using as well, because you might need to tweak it. You might have quite a nice, highly informed group where their level of knowledge is quite well. They've been working in a particular sector. Like yourself, you've been working in education for a number of years, so you've got a very good understanding of what goes on in school. So for you, I'd be able to use a different type of delivery where I can talk more in depth about certain things. I'll expect you to ask me questions that might challenge me or that might challenge you. With somebody who's completely fresh off the boat and is just thinking about coming into education, I might need to tweak the way I tell them. I might need to explain certain things that they may not know what assessments are, what happens at the beginning of a school year, how you support someone, what interventions are. So it changes the way you actually deliver your courses out as well. So in a nutshell, it gives you a baseline, so a starting point for your learner. It helps you to put special conditions in place. So, you know, is there something that you need to be adapting for? Do you need to make sure that you're giving somebody extra time because they've not got internet at home? Or have they got any learning requirements that you need to adapt for? Now, if you from here, for recognition of prior learning, for example, if you were to go on to the next level of study, you're on level 4 now, if you were to go into level 5, there might be some units that you won't have to do because you've got something called recognition of prior learning, because they can be cross-referenced to other units and so on. So what sort of, can they miss certain things out? Do they have to do everything from start to finish? And what the suitability of them is to be on that program. Is that okay, what we've gone over for initial assessment? Yeah.
Yes.
For diagnostic assessment, this is just like a pre-assessment. It helps the educator to figure out what your students' strengths are, what their weaknesses are, what their knowledge is, and what sort of skills they got prior, so before starting this course. So they also help you to figure out what sort of learning support needs there are, any gaps and any skills, help to meet basic skills and minimum core, and also to figure out the preferred learning style. So what does your student best learn with? Do they like to be a visual learner? Are they more of an auditory learner? And so on. And then you look at your learning goals. Now, we've not looked at learning goals previously. We're going to be looking at them now.
Mm-hmm.
Now, learning goals, I'm just going to read through this because it's the best way to explain. So learning goals are the knowledge and abilities that students gain from training or education. Now, these learning goals are designed to show the value of a learning program, of a session, of an exercise or an activity that they're doing. And they're typically expressed with action verbs that illustrate what participants will be able to do or demonstrate upon completion of learning. So your learning goal, your learning objective is the same as what we've got here. So if I go back onto what this is here, we've got our learning goal is be able to use initial and diagnostic assessment. So for us, that is our learning goal. For a student who may be in reception or year 1, their learning objective, because I know you have LOs for younger students as well, maybe be able to count to 10 or be able to identify different shapes and colors, those type of things. Is that clear? Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah, brilliant. So these learning goals can also include setting long or short-term targets. So, you know, saying that with the comprehension, I will be able to use my, I will be able to explain what happens in the story, or I will be able to use full stops and capital letters for when you're doing spelling and grammar.
Mm-hmm.
They can also have something called individual or group contracts. Now, I've not come across these for younger students, so I'm presuming that these are for the older ones within a school setting. It's where students will make agreements and they'll say that, okay, we're a team, we're going to be working together on one project, and this is what our tasks are, and they'll set things out for themselves. or if they have an individual contract, they'll be able to set themselves like a scale or a schedule of what they're going to be able to do, just so they can identify what their own behaviors are, what they actually need to be doing, what their tasks are. Now you would have action plans. Now an action plan, the difference between action plan and individual learning plan is action plans are normally whole class based, where you're figuring out, or you're just actually putting down using the national curriculum standards and saying we're going to be learning about fractions and decimal points for this term, and then you're putting down how you're going to break those up. Individual learning plans are just that, they're based on the individual, so they're student by student. So they'll be focused on the action plans, they'll be looking at fractions and decimal points, but they'll be saying how is this student going to learn this? What steps are they going to take to be able to learn this fractions and decimals in maths? Is that okay?
Yeah.
Yeah. Right, so on here, to answer 1.1, you just need to analyze the roles of initial assessments and diagnostic assessments and learning goals. Now, because this is an analysis, you're going to be talking about what the initial assessments are. It's quite similar to what you've already done. So look in your previous work. If you've already written down what initial assessments are, diagnostic assessments are, just copy and paste that into here, and then put in a section for learning goals. And because this is an analysis, you need to include the pros and cons, or the benefits and disadvantages of each one. So tell me what's good about initial, diagnostic and learning goals, and then tell me what's bad about it. So, you know, what can you see that is disadvantageous about these things? And then you can also put a couple of sentences in, you know, just giving me a thought on what you think.
Okay.
So 1.2, move this there. So use methods of initial and diagnostic assessment to negotiate and agree individual learning goals with learners. So there's a lot of different methods of initial and diagnostic assessments, and you've already seen a lot of these. You know that there's observations, there's tests, there's conversations, there's group activities. So there's a million things that you can actually do. But you need to use these to actually agree individual learning goals with your learners. Now, it's very important that these assessment methods that you use will have some sort of skill or knowledge assessment within it. So they are actually testing what their skills are, what their knowledge are. You're not just sitting there and having a simple conversation which leads to nothing. Now, the method you use will be set upon what the policies you've got or the procedures you've got within your own workplace. It'll be done in accordance to the learner group's ability and also with the subject that's being taught. So it's going to be these three things that you look at. You look at the policies you've got at work, what procedures you're going to be following, who you're actually looking at what is their understanding. Are they an SEN group? Are they a mid-level group, or are they a high-level group? And then what topic are you teaching? Click for it. So these methods, and you've probably come across these before, they include things like interviews, multiple choice question and answer, and not all of these are age appropriate, so you'd have to decide which ones are age appropriate for your students. Quizzes, computerized tests, practical tests, written assignments, discussions, verbal and non-verbal communication like observations and conversations, and questionnaires. Now, in regards to your learners, these can always be adapted to suit your learners. They don't have to be stuck in one particular choice. If you're doing a quiz, you could do it in a very simple, basic form where you just, ask them a couple of simplified questions if they're quite young. Within this as well, we also use English, maths, and your learning preference tests as well. And these are part of your initial assessments. And these will also be there to help and support your learner. So the reason we do English, maths, and your learning preference, like your learning style, in other words, test is just so that we get a bit of a basic background. You know, what is your student, for your younger student, what are they like with their spelling? Not every 6 or 7 year old can spell the same as each other. Not every 6 or 7 year old has the same understanding as each other. Some are born at the beginning of the year, so they've got September, October, November birthdays, so they're quite more mature than the ones that will be born at the end of the year, say June, July. And if you, I remember once being in my year 1 class with my class teacher, and we were updating our birthday wall, because I don't know if you've got in your class, we had these hot air balloons with their names on it saying this person's birthday is on June the 10th and so on. Yeah. And then from there, we were just moving it from one area to the other, and we hadn't really paid much attention to it. And then we were doing it, we thought, oh, actually, you can see the big gap in understanding within the students. Now, this doesn't mean that the students that were born in September, October, November, December were cleverer than the ones at the end of the school year. It was just we could see a difference in their maturity. So it does make a difference, isn't it? I mean, when you go back in, just have a bit of a look and see if you can notice that. And I'm pretty sure you'll be able to pick out certain children that you're like, oh, that's why.
Yeah.
So there are some methods of initial and diagnostic assessments, and we're going to look at them. And these are there just to negotiate and agree individual learning goals with your learners. So you're actually working with your learners about this. Now, this on here, I feel that the information that's on here is more for an older group of students. So if you want to talk about your younger students, you can just change it a little bit, or you're welcome to use these examples and have it as an older group. So for initial, you're going to look at what is going to inform their individual learning plan. So you could look at something like information from their CV. So if I was going to do an individual learning plan with yourself, I'd probably ask you for your CV and look at what your past experiences are, what jobs you've had previously, what education you've had. And look at your application form for when you put your enrollment information in, saying that I want to start this course, because it'll have a bit of information in there. We might do an interview. So instead of an interview, I'd say this would be the induction for us, where we had that discussion over Join Me, and we just went through the course and we talked a little bit. And I asked you a million questions because I'm nosy. And things like exercises or tasks. Diagnostic will be done on things like your knowledge or your skills tests. You know, I asked you to do I'm pretty sure, did I ask you to do a learning styles questionnaire?
No.
Oh, I didn't. I normally do, you know. I know I've done it with the naughty me, smack my hand. But I normally do a learning styles questionnaire just to see what sort of style you're on, so I can tweak my lessons in accordance to that. We could do paper or online diagnostic assessments. With the diagnostic assessments that I do, I really just use your written assignments that you send in to me just to see how you're going, and go. So it could be your essays and your coursework that you're looking throughout the course of study. And then negotiation. There'll be like things like self-assessment. You might carry out a self-assessment for yourself. We might have a discussion. We might talk about any recognition or acknowledging any skills or learning techniques that you already have. You might want to talk to me about what sort of support you need. You know, if there's something that I know I had a student that told me that quite late into our sessions told me that she had certain learning requirements. And it really changed the way I started teaching her then, because at the beginning I was thinking, I'm teaching in a particular way. I don't think it's really gelling. We're not meshing that much. I feel like she's struggling. Then when she felt comfortable, she opened up to me and she told me that she had learning requirement. After that, I completely changed the way I taught her, and I went a lot slower, went at the pace she needed, and it worked for her. And I found that she was more interactive after that. So it's where you're saying, right, no, this is not working for me. I need to do it in this way. And it does help. It's not you pulling someone up and saying, you're not teaching me well, or you're not doing something right. It's just about saying that this isn't working for me. I need you to be able to help me better. So there's loads of things on here. I mean, when you were doing your TEA qualifications, did you physically go into a college to do those?
Yeah, the level 2 I did.
Yeah. Do you remember when you used to have appraisals like twice a year, where your tutor would, those are the same sort of things. They'd have an appraisal with you, they'd see how you're doing, and then ask you, how are you getting on? Do you need any assistance? Can we change something? And I remember when I used to have my appraisals when I was doing my TA courses, because that's the first time I actually came across them, to my knowledge, or the first time I was actually aware of them. Is that I'd be like, yeah, I'm okay with this, but sometimes I feel like I might need a bit more information about this, and we'd agree on some learning goals. Whatever you agree on, whatever your goals are, they still should follow SMART. So be specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and timed. So if you're going to say, Afsha, I want you to go ahead and I want you to do an assignment for me, and you give me a 6-week schedule, that's too long. I'm going to ignore it. I'm not going to be bothered about it. I'll be like, it's all right. If you're telling me, oh, you've got 2 weeks to do it, I'll be like, right, I need to get onto it because it's going to take me a little while to finish it off. So I know that I'll actually do it. So don't be too tight with your timing and don't be too loose with your timing. I've never actually had to say to you that you've got 2 weeks for this, but normally my timing for all my students are, you've got 2 weeks, you need to give me your assignments from our last lesson within 2 weeks. But we've worked at a different rate where we've not had any gap. We've just been, because you've been keeping up on a weekly basis, we've been able to just do lesson by lesson per week. So you adapt in accordance to what your student can do.
Okay.
So, how to answer this? Just talk about how you use different methods of assessment. So how do you negotiate with your students? How do you agree individual learning goals with them? So you can talk about how you use initial, just like one paragraph just mentioning that you use initial and diagnostic assessments and you negotiate with your students, and how you actually use these assessment techniques to just figure out what sort of goals your student needs and talk to them about it. Mention how they're always SMART targets, and then make sure you use your present tense. Now, because this is a bit of an odd one, I suggest you just use a reflective account. So just think about a time where you supported your class or your group and said, right, we need to make goals. And you all might have had a goal where you're going to learn your number bonds up to 5 first. And then you're going to you can spend 2 weeks learning your number bonds up to 5. And then you're going to spend another week learning them up to 10, then up to 20, and so on. How you negotiated that and how you worked it into their daily schedules.
Okay.
And so is 1.2 okay?
Yeah.
Brilliant. So let's go on to 1.3. And this is the last one. So 1.3 is record learners' individual learning goals. Now, when let me just write this down. I need to get rid of that. 15 double A. So when you're making learning goals, it's important to make learning goals, but it's also important to make sure that they're written down as well so that you can access them. Any other staff members that might cover for you can access them. And most importantly, your students actually know what you're talking about, what they're actually meant to be doing. So if you make a learning goal and your student has no idea, it's not going to happen. It's just going to go undone. So these learning goals will include progression routes. They'll be based on your initial and diagnostic assessment information. You'll most likely have learning targets. You'll record what progress has been made and what achievements have been made. So these are the things that you'll be looking at in a learning goal. So these records, they just act as a communication aid. They're just like a document that is done between you and your student, and it supports your student in the learning process. So it's just like an appraisal form that might be filled out for you at work between your colleagues, where you're putting down what you're doing, how you're getting on, and then any goals that you want to work on and any goals that you've previously achieved. So by recording each learner's goals, this will give you the opportunity just to gather all of that information, so you can gather all of your students' targets, what their action points are, what goals they're working toward, and what sort of dates they're going to be done by, so that you can review them or achieve them. So if you know that you're going to meet back together and have another appraisal in 3 months' time, you might want to set a couple of goals for your students. Say, right, I'd like to work on these goals. We'll meet again in January and we'll discuss how you got on with them. Now, that doesn't mean that you'll completely ignore your student. If you see in the middle that they're struggling or they've met them, then you just change them, you just add things up for them. Make sure that the student has a record of these as well. So it'll just be like a piece of document where you might have a photocopy of it. One will go to your student, one will be kept with you in their file, and get them to sign it. You know, it always makes it more important when a student is signing it and saying, yes, I'm going to be working on these by this day. It's more official. So once you've agreed it, once it's been recorded, you're going to have it like a priority. So these are going to be reviewed. The teacher will actually review the targets in a timely manner. So you're not going to leave 6-7 months in between. Check them again 3 months' time. Check them again in a month's time. For you within primary, you'll probably be checking your students' goal lesson by lesson. Because if you say to them, use your capitals, use your finger spaces, use your full stops, you're not going to leave it 3 weeks before you mention it again. You'll be saying it every single time you look at their work, yeah? And then if they've done it, say, well done, you've done that, that's amazing. Now you do that sometimes. Sometimes you're doing capital letters and full stops and finger spaces. Make sure you do it every single time. Once they start doing it every single time, so well done, right, I've got a new target for you. Now I want you to be able to use some describing words. Can you use some adjectives in here? So just adapt it. So when you're recording individual learning goals, you need to make sure that you follow the follow areas. So you're covering these following areas. Make sure you're looking at the individual learning plan so that you're actually focusing on what has been set out for them already. Look at the action plans. So the action plans, again, are more overall learning objective, what they're going to be learning over a period of time. Make sure you follow your procedures and policies for where you are to, record the information correctly. Cover your learners' rights, so don't discriminate them, don't penalize them. Make sure that they're getting that equality and they're getting inclusion, and there's nothing being done that they're not getting treated in the way that they should be. And then sometimes you might need to share your learning goals and learning plans with other members of staff. For example, your class teacher in your classroom will be sharing what her learning goals are for the students with all the members of staff that work within her setting, within her class. So just to make sure that you know exactly what's going on as well, and that she's not the only person, policing it or making sure that it actually happens. So are you okay with what we've gone over for 1.3 so far?
Yeah.
Brilliant. So let's go on to the last section here. So the tips to answer this. So just start by explaining why learning records, why you record individual learner goals. So why does this take place? So for example, you record them so that all information is recorded and accessible for any professional, so any person who wants to support the students. You're going to make sure that records are made available to students so that they can access them, they can review them, they can set targets in a timely manner so that they can actually work on their targets as well and make sure that they're following their actions that you've set for them. So just a few points, a paragraph on that. And then just explain how this is done. So you just follow your individual learning plans. You're going to base it off your action plan. You're going to follow your organization's procedures. You're going to make sure that you're covering that right, so being inclusive, and that you're, sharing it as appropriate with the appropriate members of staff. So it's just about 2 paragraphs, nice detailed ones in here. You can also include some appendices to support this, so something like an individual learning plan or an action plan. These things you should have available in school as it is, if you've not got them on hand in class, because I remember we used to have folders for each student where we'd have the individual learning plan. If you've not got that, then ask your class teacher. If not, you can do a very basic search on the net, and lots of examples come up of learning plans and action plans.
Okay.
Yeah, so let's go of... Oh dear, I forgot to show you this. There you go. An example of a learning plan and an action plan. I should have put these in before. So yeah, it's just like a learning plan based on a particular student, going through what their development is going to be, what the short-term goals are, how you're going to do it, what sort of grouping it's going to be. Is it going to be class activity or individual activity, and when it's going to be done by. And then a action plan is like you're going to be learning about the topic of water in science. So you're going to be talking about meters and taps and water butts. So these will be separate lessons. For each lesson, you're going to have an action, how you're going to measure it, what the time scale is, whose responsibility it is, and is it what the result was? Were they able to learn it, or did you need to give more information on this? And these are just some real simple searches I did on the internet. I just put in ILP and I just did action plan, and there's so many available.
Okay.